Believe it or not, AI means you don't need human creativity in ads anymore. You come to a media owner or platform, you tell them your objective, connect your bank account, and everything is done for you. To investigate this, I'm Omar Oakes.
And I'm Hamish Nicklin.
And this is Believe It or Not, a podcast where two people who spent their careers inside media and advertising are now on opposite sides of the AI debate and discuss whether the biggest claims are actually holding up. And before we get into it, Hamish, something that caught my eye this week. Do you want to go first? Do you want to do yours?
No, you go first for a change. Come on, man. Let's hear what you found.
Okay, no pressure. This is actually going to be quite relevant to what we get on to discuss. But have you seen this? This is crazy. So The Information reported that Meta, formerly known as Facebook, Meta has built an internal leaderboard. They've called it Claudenomics, which it ranks its 85,000 employees by how many AI tokens they burn. So the more you're using AI, the more you go up the leaderboard. So of course, people are reportedly running AI agents in loops for hours and hours just to climb the rankings. One analyst looked at the numbers and suggested Meta alone might account for something close to a quarter of Anthropic's entire revenue, which would mean Anthropic, the company that just announced $30 billion annualized revenue, which is a big jump year on year, is partly being propped up by this competitive waste-a-thon. What do you think about that?
There's so many things about that annoy me. I mean, just the concept that it's a good thing just to use loads and loads and loads and loads of tokens. It doesn't tell you anything. It doesn't tell you whether they're using them well, whether they're using them interestingly, or whether they're just spanking them against the wall. That annoys me. And also what annoys me is that Claude just basically stopped you being able to use your Claude Max subscription like I have to power your OpenClaw, right? For people who don't know what that is, that's basically, well, I don't really know how to describe it quickly, but it's basically an incredibly powerful tool that I use to drive my personal assistant. And so they basically stopped you allowing to use your Claude Max to drive your OpenClaw. Instead, you had to use API tokens. And the reason being is that people are using too many API tokens on their OpenClaw. And now I've heard that, I'm like, that's why, because Facebook are using all the bloody compute power just to go up leaderboards. And there are so many other reasons why it's ridiculous. But anyway, well done, Meta. And that is, I'm going to rant later about Meta anyway. Another reason to rant about them. Such a ridiculous thing to do.
Yeah, and it reminds me, a lot of what bleeds into our discussion already. I'm finding on this podcast is a lot of it is about work and productivity and the future of all of that. And imagine when we were going through the transition in the 90s of moving from paper to using email all the time and thinking, this is great, all these computers and email, we're going to save on all this paper. So hey guys, in our organization, why don't we have a leaderboard to incentivize people to send as many emails as possible? I rather think we'd end up where we ended today, but anyway, Hamish, what caught your eye?
Well, mine is slightly different to what I've done in the past. In the past, I've talked about brain cells and silicon chips and a guy using ChatGPT to cure his dog's cancer. I'm going a little bit more back to the basics here and to talk about AI itself. So for me, the thing that's caught my eye, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about this because it's pretty mad. Anthropic, my favorite people who make Claude, they just announced that they've built a new model called Mythos. It's a general purpose AI, but they've made it so good at coding and reasoning. Like, it smashes all the benchmarks that came before from Opus and from Codex, OpenAI's versions. But then they realized it was so devastatingly good at something it wasn't really trained to do, right? Which was finding security vulnerabilities in software. It wasn't specifically trained to do that. They just realized it was amazing at doing it. So in a few weeks, it found thousands of zero-day bugs, which are basically really nasty bugs that could be, cause enormous problems in security vulnerabilities for software. And they found them across just about every major operating system and every major web browser, including a 27-year-old bug in OpenBSD. I'd never heard of OpenBSD before, but basically, this is one of those things that is incredibly famous for being secure. and it only cost $50 to compute to find that bug, right? So it just blew my mind. But that's not what's really blowing my mind. When you think about the billions of dollars of pressure that these companies are under to release those new models, right, to generate new revenue streams, Anthropic have looked at this thing and said, no, it's too powerful. We are not going to release it just yet. Because imagine if that gets into the hands of hackers. So what they're doing is they're saying, we're not going to release it. Instead, we've given it to Microsoft, Apple, Google, Amazon, and about 40 other companies to go and use it to fix their own vulnerabilities before it gets out into the wild. They're basically trying to inoculate the internet before that virus they've created escapes the lab. And I mean, that's not a particularly a positive way of looking at it, I suppose, me couching it in those terms. But that is, I suppose, what they're trying to do. And so it's either incredibly irresponsible or absolutely bloody terrifying. And I can't stop thinking about that. How they basically created this thing so powerful, they've given it to their competitors so that the internet and the software world that we all know doesn't break the minute they launch it. It's mad.
I'm hearing it for the first time, so I need to go away and think about it before I can really engage with it. But I have to be honest, my instinct just cries out Anthropic, hype machine, get the valuation up, get people talking about Claude, get people scared about AI. That's always my instinct as listeners.
I really don't think so, man. When you look at the evals, when you put out the data that they share, and Anthropic are one of the good guys here, right? When you look at the data they've shared, the benchmarks they put in for coding, it is a significant jump on went before. So the ability for it to be able to do this does not surprise me. And look, if this is a PR and marketing stunt, then wow, that is a bold move on their part. But
they're quite bold. They're quite bold. And you know what? I've just written down in my notes, I think that's a future claim that we need for a future episode. Anthropic is one of the good guys, because I think we could have fun with that as well. I love it. Right. So last week, listeners will know, we pulled apart the media planning side of what's going on in AI and advertising, which was about targeting, optimization, the grand claims by Group M that no human's going to touch a media plan in 5 years. Fascinating. But we need to talk about creativity, which is the really important, the golden goose as it's always been in advertising. We have to talk about Mark Zuckerberg and Meta, fortunately or unfortunately.
Do we have to talk about Mark Zuckerberg?
No, we do. So I think you should read out the quotes that we've dug out, which a lot of people who watch the industry will know. This is Mark Zuckerberg in an interview with Ben Thompson, the journalist, from May 2025. Hamish, what did he say?
He said, "You're the business. You can." No, I'll say it properly. I just can't.
That was a great impression, but yeah.
Thanks, man. You're a business. You come to us. You tell us what your objective is. You connect your bank account. You don't need any creative. You don't need targeted demographic. You don't need any measurement. Wow.
That's kind of it, yeah. So you don't need a brief, you don't need a creative team, you don't need a campaign, you just need your bank account and your objective, and Meta will do the rest. Let's not make it all about Meta. This is more about a generalized point about how media owners, platforms will essentially, the AI technology was so good that all you need to do is give them some brand assets and some parameters, and away you go. So let's be precise about this. Obviously, he has a direct financial interest in this being true. It doesn't necessarily make him wrong, but it does mean we should be careful about what he's actually claiming. So, Hamish, make the case. I mean, how are you going to make the strongest version of whether this is true?
All right. Well, I'm going to lay out the technological case for this, right? And I'm going to put aside my own feelings that I have towards that man and his company by looking at it purely through the lens of technology, all right?
Yeah.
So I'm not going to tell you whether I necessarily agree with Zuckerberg or not. We'll get into that later, okay? But look, as I said, the technology, what it can actually do right now. I'll go through the lens of things that I've built for clients myself, and specifically something that inspired me to build a thing for a client that I found on YouTube. It was a 45-minute, an hour-long conversation between these two guys. One of them was a fellow called Cody Schneider. Now, he's the co-founder of a company called Graft, which basically helps marketing teams put all their data together from things like Facebook ads and Google Analytics, put it all into one place. They can actually see what's working, right? So a classic sort of data and analytics sort of platform powered by AI. And what he did was he did a live demo where he used the same kind of AI tools that he's got, plus a bunch of others, to run his own marketing on Meta and Facebook. And he basically built the entire system that Zuckerberg is describing in about 30 minutes on this video. And he was using Claude Code and a bunch of other APIs. And I was so inspired by this, I thought, wow, I want to have that sort of system for my own business. Let's just see if I can do it. So I built it for me, built it for a couple of other people, and it's pretty mad what it can do. So I know that this isn't just some bloke showing off on a podcast. I know that it generates ROI and that it can work. So in a nutshell, if anyone's interested, here's what he did. Now, he used the Perplexity API, and if you haven't come across Perplexity, it is basically one of these AI models that's grounded in search. They all have search capability now. Obviously, Gemini does, but Perplexity is the one that is typically the best at doing search, so you get the most real-time information rather than relying on the training data. Okay. Right? So he used the Perplexity API to scrape Reddit and YouTube, and what he was looking for was real pain points from people who were doing marketing and advertising, but from a perspective of the data and the analytics. He was looking for their actual words, their real frustrations in their own language, because that's what his product solves, exactly those problems. So he's basically going straight to where his potential customers are talking about the pain that his product fixes. And then he feeds those pain points into a bulk ad generator that he had built. And this is the bit that got me. The ads he created, they weren't like image ads necessarily. They weren't like with photographs that you might design in Photoshop or Figma or anything like that, or even AI generated images that you might imagine. They were much, much simpler than that. He basically used code to build these things. So what we're talking about here are just a layout of an ad format with colors and text and shapes. And then he just exported them as images. And you and me scrolling through Facebook and those other platforms, they look just like any other sort of ad you'll find there. But there's no sort of photography, no illustration, no visual craft at all. It is just essentially a template with a pain point headline and a call to action. And because it's all code, he can generate thousands of variations essentially for nothing. A different headline, different pain point, same template. Sort of thing that typically if you were trying to do as a human, you would take weeks to do using like Figma or some other, tool. And then he used the Facebook Ads API to bulk upload all of these different variations directly into an ad set. He didn't even open Ads Manager, right? He just uploaded them via the API. And then he built himself a live tracking dashboard showing clicks and conversions over time and the cost per click and all of that sort of stuff, the demographic breakdowns, all the information you could get. And he had the AI analyze the performance data to identify the low performers by, conversion, CPM, and all that stuff. And he just turned them off automatically. So he wasn't doing anything himself. And the high performers, he got bumped into their own ad set with their own dedicated budget. And his vision for where this goes is essentially what we talked about last time with that Kapathy loop, where it just sets the whole thing running on an automated daily task. It just goes on and on and on, testing new creative and kills the losers and promotes the winners, all running in loops in the background, while you sleep or take the dog for a walk or whatever you want to do. And so, I watched this all the way through from having the idea of how he might be able to automate his own social media campaigns to publishing it, tracking it, getting it live, watching it self-optimize and do all that stuff. And, in this, there was no agency, no creative agency, no media agency, no designer, no strategist, no, media buyer. There wasn't even a brief, really. I mean, the whole thing was just running on this autonomous loop. And I guess the point of telling you that story is not only did I watch it there and think, wow, this is amazing. I built it myself. So I know this thing works. And I suppose all Zuckerberg is doing with what he's talking about here is packaging that up into a product so that you don't have to build it or you don't have to pay someone like me to build it, which, is a bit of a pain because it was a nice little revenue earner for my business. But until that comes along, I've been looking at what Meta are saying about their own AI ad stack. And I should caveat this by saying that Meta have a long and storied history of, marking their own homework somewhat generously, shall we say?
Yeah. let's give them the benefit of the doubt and let's take it on face value. So we talk about in general.
Let's take it on face value. Yeah. Okay. Gosh. Let's take them. Oh, well. Okay. All with a hefty pinch of salt. Come on, man.
Yeah.
I'm going to take it with a pinch of salt. But anyway, they're claiming that 4 million advertisers are already using their Gen AI creative tools. $60 billion in annual revenue from Advantage Plus campaigns, which I think is their version of this in an early stage. 20, and this is the bit I want to take with a pinch of salt. 22% higher ROAS than manually managed ones. So in other words, the computer that they've got automating all of the creative and doing all of this stuff for them gives you 22% better return than if you had done it yourself. And, they're testing the system that he talked about where you just input a URL and a budget and, they go for it. They manage your entire campaign. So that's the technological case, right? You can build it yourself in 30 minutes like Cody did or like I've done. It takes longer than 30 minutes, actually. Or you can let Zuckerberg do it all for you. Either way, the system, works and it doesn't need a human in the creative loop to generate those results. It's just what the tech does now. But we can get into this, and I'm sure we will, but I think it's more nuanced than that. I've just shown you that the tech works, and by works, I mean it can generate ad creatives that perform as well as or better than human-made ones historically, right? Hence that 22% improvement on ROAS versus the manual stuff. But arguably, given the swamp-like nature of what Facebook's ad ecosystem has become, that was already a pretty low bar, don't you think? Making something smell slightly less bad than the usual muck isn't actually that hard, is it?
Yeah, it doesn't make for a great control experiment, does it? Look, what I keep coming back to with this, and I take on board everything you said, and it sounds plausible, convincing, compelling. I've no doubt the technology works in inverted commas with my fingers here. You can't see it. But for advertising is more than the yellow pages, isn't it? So, in the before times, in the analog times, we didn't all, if we had podcasts back then, we wouldn't be talking about how amazing classified ads are, and these ads that we've got on digital platforms, they are essentially, they've replaced those for,
True. But we might have been talking about how amazing direct mail was or press inserts were, because they were the olden-fashioned direct response ads of the olden days, not just classifieds in the yellow pages.
Well, yeah, without getting into a debate over, whether you love a John Hegarty versus a Howard Gossage or even a Roy Sutherland, like a direct mail person, I think that's an interesting debate, and it is more nuanced than kind of, something shoved through your door, audience-driven versus big, beautiful, big idea, creative ads. Yeah. But specifically for this, everything that you're saying, everything that we are interpreting that Zuckerberg is saying, yes, it will work for bottom of the funnel, the digital online equivalent of yellow pages, classified ads, direct response, paid social performance. But we weren't kind of looking at those as really kind of driving brand building and really being effective in culture anyway. So it sounds like we're kind of talking about a very specific form of advertising. We're not really talking about video advertising, are we? And isn't that because we look at TV advertising, for example, it commands that premium that actually, yes, you assume that it comes with a big audience size, but it's not really because of the audience. All this targeting, all this audience-driven stuff, you don't need, trust us with the creative. Inherent in that, isn't it, that it's actually because we're targeting people so well into the audience, the creative can be shit, frankly. And because the audience targeting is so good, it doesn't matter. That has always been the sell of the platforms. And it just seems like AI is just buying into that story more and more. I don't actually see how it's actually doing any lift on the creative side.
Okay, I want to talk. Okay, I'm glad you went there. Because I do agree with you on all of that stuff. I mean, I suppose let's think about this. When you're saying that the creative never, it never had an impact on that lower the panel stuff, and it's just the platforms admitting that, it's all about the targeting, it's all about the technology. I think you're right, but it was never always that way with bottom of the funnel stuff. I mean, I think, look, if I go back almost 30 years ago now when I started out in this industry, I can't believe it's that long ago. creative really did matter at the bottom of the funnel back then, right? And on my first week, so I started out as a campaign assistant for what was Lloyd's TSB. So just as Lloyd's and TSB actually were coming together in the late 90s, I started out as a campaign assistant helping them get that brand out in the world. And someone handed me a battered old copy of Drayton Bird's Common Sense Direct Marketing, right? So if you don't know Drayton Bird, people, he was somebody that Ogilvy said knew more about direct marketing than anyone in the world, right? He was a legend. He still is, right? I still sign up to his emails actually because they're so cool. They're so beautifully written. Anyway, he had, we also at the time had one of my agencies, my direct response agency was WAV Rap Collins, I suppose, that we now just know as Rap down in Hammersmith. And it had, they had creative teams, strategy teams. They also had data scientists working on how to analyze stuff for the technology and not technology, but yeah, it was the technology of the time about how you target direct mail. It was a proper creative endeavor. And look, I do want to just talk about this for a bit because it's interesting about how the platforms have degraded creativity in advertising, when in actual fact, people like Bird would have said, yes, it's not the most important thing. Creativity isn't. He used to have these 5 things that matter. And I think off the top of my head, there were things like, what's the offer you're putting out there? What's the research you've done about your audience? What's the timing you're going to hit them with? Then targeting, and then finally creative, right? So he did say it was the bottom of all of the most important parts. But what he said was, if you get all of those aspects beautifully correct and as best as they can, including creative, his data showed that you'd get a 58 times multiplier on everything that you did. So creative was like a multiplier, and it was the turbo boost on the engine, right? And yet somewhere along the way, we've completely ignored that. And I think this is because when I left and stopped doing all of that direct marketing with direct mail, right, I used to send out 1 million pieces of direct mail a month to Lloyd's TSB customers, trying to get them to sign up for a personal loan, right? So yes, I was one of those that cluttered up your mat. Anyway, I then left there to go to Google, where I walked back into my old businesses and said, that 1 million pieces of direct mail you're spending, and it's costing you about 100 quid cost per acquisition to get a loan customer. We've got this PPC thing. You can get a loan customer for about 30 quid. So we transition people away from direct mail and all of that creativity that would go into the direct mail piece to do AdWords, because it was so much cheaper. Now, the creative at the time was basically done, and I think I talked about this last week, by a bunch of Oxbridge grads who had English degrees who were typing in the little sponsored links, right? They hadn't been trained on Drayton Bird stuff, but it worked. And when I say worked, it was significantly cheaper cost per acquisition. So we just moved all the money across into paid search and then paid social, not because of the creative benefits, but because it was cheaper. And the reason it was cheaper, Omar, was because hardly anyone was doing it at the time. The auction model, it wasn't that saturated, right? And the technology was so good. I've done some research now, right, because I was preparing for this. You look at the cost per acquisition that you get for a personal loan or paid social or search, it's basically the same as what we used to get through direct mail. So I just think that advantage that they had because of the technology, because of the lack of auction, is all gone. And in doing so, we've shifted away from something where creativity was a multiplier and really important in the bottom funnel, where humans could really genuinely make an impact. The impact that we could see on different campaigns at the bottom of the funnel on direct mail between a good creative and a poor creative was noticeable. But you just don't see it really with paid search and paid social to the extent that you used to, because we've never bothered. The platforms have never bothered to try and be creative. And I'm not saying we now go and train up a load of creatives on Drayton Bird style principles to write paid social ads. That ship has gone. It's well and truly sailed. But I suppose it's just an observation that creativity once mattered in the bottom funnel, and now we've got so used to not really having it that we're just letting the machines do it. And I don't know whether I think that's sad, whether I'm supporting AI here, whether I'm not supporting AI. I just think it's an interesting point that we've just sort of let it go. Or was that just a random rant about the olden days?
Well, I think there are 2 things, aren't there? There's the creative ideation process and there's the production process. So it sounds like what we're saying is we're sort of having this argument, just accepting that even if what you might see on YouTube, for instance, nowadays, I don't know if you see this, maybe it's a sign of how I'm getting older, but I'm constantly being bombarded on YouTube by these fake AI generated Tai Chi. You must do Tai Chi ads. And it's like, this kind of guy who looks amazing, but he's apparently 70 years old, telling you why you must do Tai Chi, and he's got eight-pack abs and all the rest of it. So there's an example of how there's just increasingly just so much AI slop being generated, and it's crap, it's garbage, right? I think in this conversation we're accepting that the production is going to get better and is going to be at a level where it's going to really upend the whole production industry more than it's doing already. And this applies to movies and television and not just ads. But then when we talk about the creative idea part of it, it sounds like we're kind of playing this hide the ball, where it's almost like we're kind of implicitly accepting that the ideas aren't going to be as good as what a bunch of experienced humans could create. But we're saying, well, it doesn't matter. And that makes me uncomfortable, because it just feels like we're accepting an industry which is going down this road of just binning all these decades of we look at outdoor and print and television and radio and just all these kind of like wonderful ideas that have been created by humans, that it's really questionable to what extent an AI can do that, particularly if you're saying that it's all about targeting and it's not about the big idea anyway. And remember that it's not just about, again, audience, it's about the company that you keep. It's about knowing that the content that you're advertising against is being editorially curated and it's compliant legally. When you put something on Piccadilly Circus, that's a public big statement by a brand. You could be embarrassed by that. It's not just one-to-one, some sketchy brand serving me an AI-generated Tai Chi ad when I'm kind of scrolling YouTube in my bed. Do you know what I mean? It sounds like very different threats we're talking about.
Yeah, totally. And I think what's interesting is if we unpick a little bit what you said there, and you look and say, okay, so what happens when you take the human out of that idea process? There's no human thinking of the big idea. There's no human thinking of the craft of how you tell the story of that idea, how you articulate it and express it. What you get is Facebook swamp, both in terms of ad quality, ad content, in terms of you get the YouTube swamp of that Tai Chi dude with weird generated ads. You get that sort of stuff, which leads into everything that we know in the ad industry about people's lack of trust in our industry, because it's just so full of crap. Well, trust in advertising was much higher when we had humans doing every single bit of it. So, I think there are unintended consequences of letting the machines do all of this stuff, because all we have to do is see the impact that sort of ad, that sort of creative has had on the major platforms and the quality of what goes on there and the impact that has on people's respect and trust in advertising as a whole. So we definitely can't allow this to carry on going. But I think the point is, I don't think it will. I think, the need for a human to take the strategic insights, come up with a really bold, brave, new idea, and then find creative ways to articulate it. I don't think that's ever going to go. I really, really don't. And I know we touched on this in our last episode when we talked about the media planning cycle and lesser. I just don't think that element of human creativity is going to come out of this. I think that where we will see AI playing a bigger role is in how it supports the articulation and expression of those things, through the production companies, and what the ads are. Your Tai Chi guy, that's an interesting example, because are you saying is that one of those ads that you think is obviously made from, Google's VO3, where somebody has just gone along and typed it in, and was that Tai Chi guy real, or was he an AI generated human making that ad?
It's just AI generated completely. Right, okay. I mean, to be fair, for that particular ad which comes to memory, there is actually some text that you can just about see, which tells you this is an AI generated image. But this stuff is kind of floating around all the time, and it's just inherently deceptive and sketchy, and it creates just this constant stink around the industry that we would just be well shot of, to be honest.
And I don't think it's going away, though. I don't think that shit's going away. I think we're going to see more and more of that as more and more people have these tools in their hands and they're able to, they've got a small business and they want to do advertising, where they start trying to do it themselves. But I do think that the difference is going to come in when you put that tool in the hands of people who really know what they're doing. when you put it in the hands of somebody who is a videographer, who is a director, who understands lighting, who understands the different types of cameras and film qualities and, camera lenses and lighting quality and how to pan and how to shoot, words that I don't really understand. I'm saying these things, but I'm not a creative. I've never been on a shoot. I don't know what, I don't really know what this stuff means, but there will be people who totally understand the language of film and how to talk through it. If you were to give an art director or a director these tools and just say, look, prompt it in the way that you would prompt your team of experts, I bet you they would see, in fact, I know because I've done some research for this pod, what happens when you give these tools like VO3 to actual filmmakers. There's nothing slop about it. You can still see there's the uncanny valley. So there's too much of a sheen on the humans. Everything's too bright. Everything's too perfect. But where Google are going with things like VO3 is that they've started giving it real world science, right? So the AI no longer bends the rules of gravity. Right, hands have only got 5 fingers. Cars don't fly as opposed to driving. It understands science, it understands shadows, it understands how things should work in the real world. So it's getting so much better than it was 12 months ago. That's why I say if you give it to the hands of somebody who knows what they're doing, I think it's going to change the way that we do production.
Yeah. We can't do this justice in this episode, but maybe this is one for a future episode that, this is when you talk about production, it's not just about advertising. We're talking about film, we're talking about TV. Let's not forget, the UK creative production sector is one of the things this country still is genuinely world class at, punches above its weight, despite Brexit and all the other issues it has to navigate. If the production layer really is changing in the way that we've described, it has massive economic implications. I'm going to write that down. We should definitely go into that in further depth. But let's talk about more second order effects. What you've just described, I think I mentioned in a previous episode, I just look at AI as being this sort of K-shaped accelerator. How we might have talked previously about the K-shaped economy that people talk about that we're in, where if you're kind of already doing really well and experienced, then you can, the haves are going to get even more they're going to have more, and the have-nots, it's going to be worse for them. So they're going in two different directions, like a K-shape. I just think that AI is going to be like this as well. So if you're an experienced creative production person and you've got the time and experience and know how to pivot to using AI tools, then I can see this being hugely accretive, accelerating for your business. But if you're not, and we talked about previously in terms of the jobs that might go in episode 1, if you're inexperienced, you're going to potentially be left behind. What do you think are the biggest second order effects here?
Well, for me, I do worry what we talked about, the production industry, the creative industries that we have. We are, as you said, Brexit aside, we are renowned worldwide for our creative output, for our expertise in making films and production and TV, and all our directors and cinematographers and editors who understand the language of filmmaking. I worry about what the implications of tools like VO3 just becoming very lifelike and realistic. We're not there yet. We've got a way to go before that happens, but I do worry about that. And I suppose the optimist in me is looking at it and going, well, maybe that's actually our advantage, right? We've got the thousands of people who've spent decades learning exactly the right vocabulary. And I appreciate, to your point around the K-shape, this is going to benefit those people who've got those decades, not the people entering that industry. But they've got, they understand the language, they understand the vocabulary, they understand how to make things look and sound and feel right. They, if the tools change the craft, if the tools change, I genuinely think the point is the craft knowledge stays, right? Then if that's true, then arguably we could actually come out of this stronger as a country, because all of those directors and cinematographers and editors that we've got who understand that language of filmmaking, well, they're the ones who will be able to do what I said before, which is prompt these tools properly. And they can now produce 10 times the volume than they used to be able to do. And it could be that the UK becomes this global hub of productivity or production expertise. We could just produce everything for Hollywood, for Bollywood, for any sort of studio around the world, because we've got the experts here. And inevitably, you're going to need to bring junior people on to train them. So instead of people coming around, running around with rigs, they're learning how to prompt, they're learning the language. I don't know, maybe I'm being too Pollyanna and optimistic, but I do think that this is coming. Right, these tools are coming whether we like it or not. We can't stop the tools unless government does something and there's some form of regulation, which doesn't look likely. The tools are coming, and I think people need to embrace them, because the other option is somebody else will, and we don't want another country stealing all of our expertise, taking a march on us. We've got the experts in the country now. If they learn how to and teach themselves how to use these tools, the expertise, they'll have a huge multiplier benefit than anybody who doesn't have it. And as I said, I think we could genuinely become a hub of production expertise for the world and really grow what we do and just own the space because of, the heritage and the history of what we've got in this country. So it might go the other way. But I think it depends on how hard we lean into the tools. What do you think?
And I think, I just think that a lot of people could really get themselves in trouble by using AI in the wrong way because they don't have that experience, they don't have that judgment. And I can see very quickly, it's already maybe sort of happening. We've seen a lot of stories in the last 18 months about publishers who've been caught out by accepting fake story pitches from AI-generated, not just PR people, but journalists who've just accepted just copy that's been just fake stuff in there, as well as being generated by AI. You can have to be really careful about being discerning, which is why I talk about K-shapes again, because we're just going to constantly hear stories going forward about people, maybe because inexperienced people have been caught out or lazy people or whatever. I just see mind traps. There be dragons everywhere. As a journalist who, I've got my own business going on. I'm kind of trying to produce a lot of content. I do use AI kind of sparingly and quite surgically.
Go on, tell us. How do you do it? Omar? I'm actually genuinely fascinated about how you, a somewhat cynical, human with regards to AI, would use it, actually, because you are a creative. Journalists are creatives. And I'd be fascinated to hear how you do it, man.
Well, to an extent, it's quite different to the people we've just been talking about who are kind of, people who went to art school and kind of live this stuff. But yeah, I do creative-ish writing as a business journalist. And I have to say, believe me, I've experimented with different AI tools in terms of, here's my voice. And you can do these things where interview me, ask me 100 questions about how I think about the world and how I write and what my tone of voice is, and then build a skill in Claude. And I've tried that, believe me. And it still doesn't work. And this is what I mean about kind of getting into trouble. I think a lot of people kind of will do things like that and think, yeah, that's great. And then they put stuff out into the world and, it's just really obvious that what you put out on LinkedIn is created by AI. It's just so obvious. I hate it. I can't even scroll LinkedIn anymore. It's just all this kind of AI drivel nonsense. It's so boring. I have to tell you, I've said before, it's like the hair dye of marketing. You could just tell. People might not be telling you to your face, but you could just tell. So I'm very sensitive to that. I still kind of do the bulk of the writing myself, and I think that's important. Thinking is writing.
Before we go on to how you use it, can we just talk about that? That sort of like you hate it, it turns you off, you can hardly go to LinkedIn anymore. I've got to say, I've used this phrase before with people who hate AI generated content. I've got to say, I think it's intellectual snobbery, man. It does, and maybe it's okay coming from you because you're a journalist, right? And it piques you more because your bread and butter is writing, right? And so it is your craft, it's what you do, it's your skill, it's what you've honed over years. And so maybe it isn't intellectual snobbery from you, all right? I don't want to ruin our friendship just as we're on episode 3 of this thing. But like, for so many people who just complain about it, I'm like, come on, man. Like, I've spoken to so many people and had so many, because I bitched about this on LinkedIn about people who complain about AI content. And the amount of direct messages I've had from people who say thank you for standing up for us, because I've now felt like I've had a voice. I can actually say things that I wouldn't bother say before because they just find it really hard to articulate and express themselves, and AI's help them. And yes, all right, it might sound like it's AI generated, but they're saying, look, it's still my idea. It's still me that said, AI, this is what I want to say. They're not someone saying, oh, LinkedIn, write me a post on X, and having no input into the theory. They're just getting help in the way that the words come together. And all right, it might not be as beautiful and as articulate as some strategist who is, uber intelligent and can articulate themselves beautifully, or as a journalist, but they're at least finding a way of taking the kernel of an idea or a thought they've got, and they're putting it out in the world, which is something they would never have done before. And they're being able to engage in conversation and discussions in a way that they felt that they never could before. And this isn't just one-off. So I mean, every time I make one of those rants, which I don't do anymore because it really weirdly, for the reason for this podcast, people get really aggressive. But they do. But the people who come and direct message me, they're always saying, look, AI is helping me have a voice.
I think there are three things, because number one, yes, I'm an intellectual slob, but let's just take that as read. But also, I think I'll answer this by getting into a bit more detail about what I do, because I've written about this on my Substack, how I use AI, but it's moved on a bit since then. So, for example, I do a weekly post on my Substack where I kind of look at all the big stories that are going on in our industry, media and advertising, and I write a think piece about what I think the big story is and why it's the big story. So it's kind of analysis, but it's interpreting how things are reported through trade media and business media and national media in order so people understand, because I think that's a big part of how we understand what's going on in this industry. Now, there's a lot of stuff to read, so I do kind of take a first pass at headlines through kind of different ways. I kind of collect newsletters and look at different websites, but then I have to, where Claude, which is currently used now, where it's really useful, is about bucketing those into different themes and actually helping me sense check in terms of different connections. And the search function is a lot better than what I was using on ChatGPT, so I can actually use it to very quickly verify stats and all sorts of kind of things you should do for research. Obviously, anything I'm using in the final product, I double check myself. That's still really important because these things do make mistakes. But in terms of the drafting and the structuring, I sometimes, depending on what I'm writing, will use it to kind of structure things in terms of I want to say this and I want to say that. Sense check that this kind of coheres together, and it can be quite helpful for that. But as soon as we get into the real kind of writing part of it, believe me, I've tried, but it's not very good at that. And I don't think that even if it was much better than it currently is, I don't think I would want it to do it for me anyway. And this is where I disagree with you on your point about all these people kind of coming to you furtively and saying, oh, it's really helped my writing. When you talk about that clever strategist, that person writes well because they're clever. It's not mutually exclusive. The writing is a function of their thinking. The writing is how they think. To be honest, I don't really know what I think about a lot of things until I've actually spent the time kind of tapping away on a keyboard and thinking, this thing makes me feel uncomfortable. Why does it do that? And something starts happening when the keys start jangling on the keyboard. Something starts happening with my brain where the kind of argument comes out.
But isn't that just the way that your brain works, though? I mean, I just want to go back. You're not saying that only clever people can write well.
I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that all other things being equal, clever people write well because they're clever. They go. I know that there are people who are just very kind of like numerates more than they're literates, and people have different skill sets and all the rest of it. But in general, when people are thinking about things, they have to read a lot. They have to know they have to get their information from somewhere.
I don't know if I agree with that. I mean, I've met super clever people who can't articulate for shit. Their ability to work out formula, and like when I worked at Google, the amount of data scientists and engineers I met who were amongst the cleverest people that exist on the planet, who you'd sit down and have a conversation with them and you'd be like, what? You can't string a sentence together, but put you in front of a computer to write some code to create something, and your genius clearly comes out. I don't think that just because you're clever means that you can articulate your thoughts. I've come across loads of people who are who are geniuses, but you get them in a room, they can't articulate their thoughts, which is where for them AI really helps, because they're able to just dump stuff, these random just, verbal diarrhea, it might sound like to me when I've spoken to them. But then the AI makes sense of that, and it sort of curates it, and it helps them have a flow. And it's like they're sitting there going, yeah, that's what I want to say. But my brain doesn't work that way, Omar. My brain doesn't work in a way that means that I can, by thinking things through and typing on a keyboard, suddenly become articulate. What they're saying is, it helps me structure my thoughts in a way that means that people can actually understand it. It's not because they're stupid. They might be unbelievable data scientists and engineers whose brains are wired differently, and articulating in language and speech isn't their natural zone. Now, all right, I'm going on the extremes here, but we don't just live in extremes, and there are people in the spectrum of intelligence and how their brains are wired who have a level of comfort with communication and articulation that others don't. So I think it's a bit unfair to say, intelligent people usually, because of the way that they think things through, can articulate themselves. I don't think that's true. And I think for those people where it's not true, AI really helps them.
Well, I think coming from the land of Google, you may have been exposed to a very particular sort of very clever person. Whereas if we're trying to extrapolate this into kind of how AI is going to transform creativity going forward, with respect to those people, I assume they were engineers, quants that you worked with at Google. They're not going to be the ones that were asking to kind of like build the new world of creativity in the digital age. We're still talking about, I'm talking about my very select kind of form of, writing creativity, if you want to call it that, and applying it to, if you're a visual artist, if you're a technical artist, the people that can do this stuff well, when we go back to the K-shaped, they are people that, it's not just being able to, when I say I tap my keyboards and something happens, that's not kind of like an instant thing. That kind of takes years and years of experience and kind of knowing that that's the kind of process and how to kick my brain into gear. You need to build that over time. Hard things are hard because they take time and, your 10,000 hours deliberate practice to do. And you can't, as I say, even if AI gets better, in quote marks, as these LLMs are constructed, they're playing a word guessing game where they kind of, it's like probabilistically, the AI is playing a game where it's like, will I get positive feedback for filling in the blanks properly? That's how they're built, right? Based on the training data.
Yeah.
And necessarily, like, play this game. I don't know. Have you played this game before? The number game with AI. You ask Claude, pick a number between 1 and 10. Should we do this live?
Yeah, go on, let's do it. So I'm opening up Claude, new chat. What do I say? Pick a number between 1 and 10. Okay, I'm going to speak to it because that's how I talk to it.
Yeah.
Pick a number between 1 and 10. All right, what's it saying? What's it going to say? Are you telling me it's got... what's it going to say?
I predict it will say 7.
It says 7.
Ah. Do it again.
Again?
Yeah.
Pick a number between 1 and 10.
Yeah.
What is this going to say now?
Is it 3?
No, it's 4.
Oh, okay, got it wrong. Okay, one more time.
Pick a number between 1 and 10.
Is it 9?
Yes, it is.
Now do it again in ChatGPT. If you even would, another one.
Let me open that up. Is this a clean chat? Yeah, it is.
And just do exactly the same. Just do exactly the same thing. Ask it 3 times, and just tell me what the numbers are.
Pick a number between 1 and 10.
The look on your face.
Oh, it's reading. I've got it in 5.4 Pro. It's. Sorry. Let me change model. Anyway, listen. This probably isn't interesting for our readers. I'm assuming it's going to say 7, 3 or 4, 9.
Yeah. I Because I've done this and it really does work, and I would invite listeners to do the same. Tell us if it doesn't work. Please email in. But that's an example about how you ask it can't think. It doesn't know what random is. It doesn't know what anything is. All it's doing is it's been trained on how to fill in the blanks, and it's been trained to know that once you kind of do that enough times, the most natural number that comes up is 7. That's the most satisfying human answer. Do you know what I mean?
Okay, so your point is it's going to, through statistical analysis, it's always going to sort of come towards the mean, right? So it's always going to come towards the average. I mean, yes, I totally agree with you there. That is what it's going to do. But I also think that's where the power of prompting comes in. That's where the power of understanding what context to give it comes in, where the power of telling it how you're going to evaluate it comes in. Now, for something like pick a number between 1 and 10, fine. But if you're asking it to do something significantly more strategic or creative, you can get it to move away from the mean, as blunt as that one was, through prompt engineering. You really can. That's where the power of a good prompt, understanding context, understanding objective, understanding how to evaluate it, and iterating with it takes it way away from that mean. Because, you're basically changing the weights of the model, right? So the model's got its own weights, which is why it answers 7, 3, and 9 when you ask it to pick numbers like that. But you can change the weights through your prompt. So you can get it to move away from the statistical mean. And I think this is the problem that we're facing, is that a lot of people who are using AI aren't prompting it properly. They don't understand how to use it properly. And as a result, we're getting what is everyone's calling AI slop. And I genuinely believe this. So I know that you've said that you can't get tone of voice skill to work for you. I've got it to work for me where it sounds 95% like me. It's not 100%. You're right. It's not. I do have to edit it, but not much, man. I mean, I'm very happy with, I've been refining my tone of voice skill for 7 months. Like every couple of weeks I tweak it. I go, no, come on, you're straying too much into this territory. It gets rid of all, I would say, it gets rid of first pass, gets rid of all the classic telltale signs. And what you see in there is what I normally say anyway. Right. So, but that's because I've learned how to prompt. So the skill, a Claude skill, is basically just a clever prompt. So I agree. I am agreeing with you a lot that it comes down to the statistical mean, that there's a lot of AI slop, that, if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to just get garbage. And I do agree with that. And unfortunately, the majority of people who are using it don't know how to use it.
Yeah. So very early days, but let's try and come up with a verdict then. So believe it or not,
what the question is. What is the question you're talking about? We sort of went all around the place on this one.
Well, there's a lot to this. It's good. So what do you think? Believe it or not, AI means you don't need human creative in ads anymore.
Bullshit. You still need human AI. You still need human creative in ads. 100%.
Yeah.
100%.
I completely agree. I think it collapses when you actually look at where advertising creates value, not just commercial value, cultural value, the work that actually gets people to look at ads and think about them and talk about them with other people, which does happen. Work that stands in public and has a reputation to defend. I think there's a separate, we've talked about this a lot, but there's a separate question around production, and that is going to change. And even in my small way through my own writing and my own business, there is a production element which is changing with AI as well. I didn't get into that as much as I maybe kind of could have, but maybe for future
But
episodes.
I think maybe another episode, because in another episode, I'd love to show how I use it for my creative endeavors, whether that's helping me create my scripts for YouTube, my LinkedIn stuff, how I use it for proposals to clients, how I use it to solve problems strategically, which is all creative thinking. I've definitely got approaches that I'd love to share, because whilst it's not taking me out of the loop, to the point here, do we still need humans in creativity? 100%, I think we do. But the AI can supercharge us, and I would love to share how I use it so that you can see what I'm talking about.
Yeah. And I think the whole point about this conversation is for us to be open about how we're doing these things. I don't want us to live in a world where everyone's kind of like at home, kind of, if they're working from home, furtively kind of like using these tools and kind of not talking about it and kind of running into these minefields as we talked about. It's important to actually have this out in the open as much as we can stand to do it.
I think you sitting here in this podcast saying, look, I'm quite cynical about AI, but I use it and here's how I use it, is a way to help. Like, okay, fine, fair enough. Every word that we read that comes out of Omar Oakes, either in the Media Leader or on your Substack is written by you. Great. That's good to hear. From a journalist, I think I want that. I really do. I'm less bothered by other people, but for some reason, despite everything I've said, I do want that from my journalists. But to hear that you use it in your process, I think is a really good thing. I think it's encouraging because it shows that even cynical journalists can get AI to help them.
Well, there'll be people listening to this thinking, well, that bloody hypocrite. Well, he's kind of saying one thing and doing the other, and I don't have all the answers to this, but I'm like a lot of people. I'm muddling through this, and I'm skeptical, as is clear. But I do want to be open-minded because I think it's interesting, and this is the technology which everyone's talking about and is driving the stock market, and we cannot ignore it. Anyway, that was episode 3 of Believe It or Not. We're doing this limited run with the Media Leader every Thursday. If something we said was wrong, shock horror, or maybe if there was evidence that we missed, or maybe something we need to explore further, please do get in touch with us. My email is omar@oomphumph.com. Hamish is at hamish@goagentflow.com. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll catch you next time.